My name is Dr. William Thompson, and what I'm about to share with you is an experience that still haunts me to this day. It took place on the night of November 15th, 2021, at St. Mary's Hospital, an old medical facility known for its history and architectural beauty. But behind its beautiful facade lies a series of dark, unexplained occurrences that have turned it into a place of fear and mystery. This story is a testament to one such night when the past refused to stay buried and came back with a vengeance. The day started like any other. I was on the night shift, covering for a colleague who had fallen ill. St. Mary's, despite its old age, was usually bustling with activity. Nurses, doctors, and patients moved about, and the sound of monitors and intercom announcements filled the air. My friend and colleague, Dr. Emily Carter, was also on duty that night. Emily and I often teamed up for night shifts, sharing our cases and coffee to get through the long hours. Around 7 p.m., Emily and I met in the cafeteria for a quick dinner before the shift. We discussed the usual hospital gossip, the upcoming holiday plans, and a particularly difficult case we were both consulting on. It was all so normal, so routine, that I had no inkling of the horror that was to come. At 10 p.m., I was called to the ICU to check on Mr. John Avery, a patient recovering from a severe heart attack. Mr. Avery was a friendly old man in his 70s, always quick with a joke despite his condition. As I examined him, he suddenly grabbed my hand with a strength that belied his frail condition. His eyes, wide with terror, locked onto mine. "Doctor, you need to leave this place," he whispered urgently. "There's something here. Something evil." I tried to calm him, attributing his fear to the medication and the stress of his illness. "It's all right, Mr. Avery. You're safe here. Just rest and we'll take good care of you." He shook his head, his grip tightening. "No, you don't understand. It comes at night. It takes people. Please, leave while you still can." I gently pried my hand from his grasp, promising to return later. But his words stayed with me, a seed of unease planted deep in my mind. At around midnight, the hospital's atmosphere changed. The bustling sounds quieted down, and an eerie stillness settled over the place. Emily and I were in the ER, dealing with a minor case of food poisoning. The patient, a young woman named Lisa, was chatting with us when suddenly the lights flickered. The power outages were not uncommon at St. Mary's, given its age. However, this time the flickering lights seemed to take on a life of their own, pulsating with a rhythm that felt almost sentient. Lisa's eyes widened in fear as she looked around the room. "Did you see that?" she whispered. Before we could respond, a cold draft swept through the ER, chilling us to the bone. Emily and I exchanged uneasy glances, trying to maintain our composure for the patient's sake. Once we finished treating Lisa, we decided to investigate the source of the draft. We traced the cold air to a long abandoned wing of the hospital. This section had been closed off for years due to structural issues and was rarely mentioned or visited. The corridor leading to it was dark and filled with cobwebs, the air thick with neglect and decay. "Do you really think we should go in there?" Emily asked, her voice shaky. "We need to find out what's causing this," I replied, though a part of me wanted to turn back. Armed with flashlights, we ventured into the abandoned wing. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of our footsteps echoing off the walls. As we moved deeper, we began to hear faint whispers, unintelligible but distinctly human. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. "Is anyone there?" There was no response, just the relentless whispering that seemed to grow louder with each step. At 1 a.m. we reached what used to be the children's ward. The sight that greeted us was chilling. Old rusted hospital beds lined the walls, and faded drawings of smiling children adorned the peeling wallpaper. The room was unnaturally cold, and our breath came out in visible puffs. Emily shivered, clutching her flashlight tightly. "This place gives me the creeps, Will. Let's get out of here." Just as we turned to leave, the whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a loud, anguished cry that reverberated through the ward. We froze in our tracks, hearts pounding. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure standing at the far end of the room. It was a child, a little girl in a hospital gown, her eyes dark and hollow. She stared at us with an intensity that rooted us to the spot. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible, yet piercing in the silence. I took a step forward, but Emily grabbed my arm. "No, Will, we need to leave. Now!" Before I could respond, the girl vanished, leaving behind an overwhelming sense of dread. We turned and fled the ward, the whispers rising to a deafening cacophony as we ran. Back in the safety of the main hospital, we tried to make sense of what we had seen. Emily was visibly shaken, and I felt a deep unease gnawing at me. We decided to check the hospital records for any information on the abandoned wing. In the archives, we discovered a series of tragic events that had occurred in the children's ward decades ago. A fire had broken out, claiming the lives of several children and a nurse who had heroically tried to save them. The ward was closed off after the incident, deemed too damaged to repair. As we read through the reports, the pieces began to fall into place. The whispers, the cold drafts, the ghostly figure of the little girl, all were remnants of that tragic night. At 3 a.m., we were called back to the ICU. Mr. Avery's condition had worsened, and he was in a state of panic. He kept repeating the same words over and over. "It's coming, it's coming." We did our best to stabilize him, but his fear was palpable, infecting the entire ward. The other patients began to stir, their sleep disturbed by an unseen presence. As we worked, the lights flickered again, and the temperature dropped. The air grew thick with a sense of impending doom. Suddenly, the monitors started to malfunction, displaying erratic readings and emitting high-pitched beeps. Emily and I exchanged a look of sheer terror. We knew something was terribly wrong. At 3:30 a.m., the hospital was plunged into darkness as the power went out completely. Emergency lights flickered on, casting eerie shadows on the walls. We heard footsteps echoing through the corridors, heavy and deliberate, coming closer. "Stay here with the patients," I told Emily. "I'll go check it out." She nodded, her face pale with fear. I stepped into the hallway, my flashlight barely piercing the darkness. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I turned a corner and came face to face with a figure standing in the shadows. It was the nurse from the old records, her face burned and twisted in agony. She reached out a hand, her eyes pleading. "Save them," she whispered, her voice filled with despair. I stumbled back, unable to look away. The figure dissolved into a cloud of smoke, leaving behind a cold, suffocating presence. I ran back to the ICU, my heart pounding. We need to get everyone out of here, now. As we began evacuating the patients, the hospital descended into chaos. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and shadowy figures moved through the corridors, their cries echoing in the darkness. Emily and I managed to get the patients to safety, but the sense of dread only intensified. We knew we had to confront whatever was haunting the hospital. We returned to the abandoned wing, determined to put an end to the terror. As we entered the children's ward, the air grew thick with a malevolent energy. The ghostly figures of the children appeared, their eyes filled with sorrow. "Help us," they whispered, their voices echoing through the room. We realized that the spirits were trapped, unable to move on from the night of the fire. The nurse's spirit, consumed by guilt, was also bound to the hospital, her agony keeping the children in a perpetual state of torment. Emily and I joined hands, praying for the souls of the lost children and the nurse. We begged for their forgiveness, hoping to release them from their suffering. As we prayed, A blinding light filled the room and the figures began to fade. The cold draft dissipated and the whispers ceased. We felt a sense of peace settle over the ward, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. Exhausted, we made our way back to the main hospital, the sense of dread finally gone. The power was restored and the monitors returned to normal. The patients were safe and Mr. Avery, though still weak, was no longer in a state of panic. In the following days, Emily and I researched the history of the fire, ensuring that the spirits of the children and the nurse were properly honored. We organized a memorial service.